Welcome to the Impact Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Beck, and we've got another amazing episode here today. Our guest today is just going to be sharing some amazing information about selling, the changing landscape of what's going on in the world today, and all the different things that you need to be thinking about when you're out there as a professional salesperson. So before we get to that, I'd like to kick things off with just going through some of the things that we all should be considering when we look at professional selling or being out there as an entrepreneur, representing our own product and selling it to consumers, to the world. So, one of the things that I think is important for everybody to recognize when you're out there is first for people to be able to recognize that you bring tremendous value and can have a big impact on them. You need to be recognized. You need to stand out. You need to make sure that they first see you before they can hear you. So today we're going to talk just a little bit about the importance of making sure that you do everything possible to remain top of mind with your prospects and the people that you want to work with. Now, what might that look like? Well, it depends a lot on what industry that you're in, what you're trying to promote or sell. The number one rule is go to where your prospects are. If you have a really good sense of where your prospects congregate, whether it's on social media or particular groups, then you definitely want to be there in front of them. For many people, they can generate more than enough prospect interest right off of social media. But how do you stand out? How do you really make sure that people recognize you and pay attention to what it is that you're saying? You know, we're going to make some assumptions. We're going to assume you have a great offering or a great product or service that you want to provide, but you need to get in front of people and you need to talk to enough of them so you can win some of them as clients. So it starts with being yourself, putting yourself out there and being transparent and real and not being afraid to share with your audience, whether it's on social media, whether it's in an in-person event, whether it's one-on-one. Be yourself, be genuine. Make sure that you're not out there trying to act like anybody else or do something that other people do. Just be yourself. Now, this one thing alone in today's world will actually help you stand out. And a lot of what we talk about with the Impact Sales Podcast is other ways that you can stand out. You know, just the idea of focusing on impact and the things that it will do for your prospects, your clients, and more importantly, how they may feel about all of that. That in and of itself is different than a lot of people that are out there. But the landscape is changing. The world we live in today is a lot different than the world we lived in 2 years ago, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. It's a whole different marketplace. Things are changing. Dynamics are changing, and it's important that you stay up to speed as to what's going on and how you could address things. So, in our next segment, our main segment, our guest is going to talk about some of that. She's going to talk a lot about how to approach things from a professional sales standpoint, and more importantly, really how to stand out by the way you handle and do things. And we're going to dig into some of the complexities of sales environments. It's not as simple as it used to be, but that's okay. There's a lot of positives to that as well. So just to give you a little hint, she's a LinkedIn #1 sales influencer, a Hall of Fame keynote speaker, an author, a sales strategist. She's got a new book out, and she's the owner of Engage Selling Solutions. My guest coming up in the main segment, Colleen Francis. Don't go anywhere. Are you struggling to create dynamic and consistent sales success for your business? Whether you're an entrepreneur or a sales professional selling for somebody else, are you struggling to meet and exceed your sales objectives? Maybe you're hearing countless objections. Maybe you're not able to move people forward through the sales process, or maybe it's the dreaded, they like everything that they hear, but they just don't pull the trigger and they just don't sign with you. Well, if this is happening to you, I'd like to help. For well over 30 years, and after tens of thousands of live sales interactions and working with over 3,500 sales professionals and entrepreneurs, I've developed a proprietary sales system to help you create dynamic and consistent sales success. This system will help you overcome objections, help you position yourself as a trusted advisor and sales professional, and more importantly, help you take business across the finish line so you can win more clients. If you're struggling, I'd like to help. You can schedule a complimentary impact sales strategy session to talk with me, Joe Beck, by texting the word sales to the number 321-421-3683. 5213. That's sales to the number 321 421 5213. You don't have to settle for average sales results. I look forward to speaking with you. Hi, welcome back to the Impact Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Beck, and with me in the studio, she's LinkedIn's #1 sales influencer, a Hall of Fame keynote speaker, an award-winning sales strategist, and a best-selling author. Her new book is Right on the Money: New Principles for Bold Growth, and she's the owner of Engage Selling Solutions. Please welcome to the Impact Sales Podcast, Colleen Francis. Hey, Colleen, how are you?
Hey, Joe, I'm really good and I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much. It's our pleasure. We love having you with us. So, I like to start things off when I do these interviews, Colleen, with a simple question, and it's, how did you get started in sales?
It's such a funny story. I grew up in a sales household. My dad was a salesperson. And so my real start in sales was when I would come home from school with something to sell for soccer, camp or band camp. And my dad made me go door to door. We were allowed to do that in those days, right? He wouldn't
Hmm.
take it to work. So I started selling at a really young age and then ended up putting myself through university with all sales jobs. And so it seemed like a natural thing for me. My dad grew up in sales. I made sales calls with my dad when I had days off school to just go into that profession. And professionally, I started in the insurance business. So life insurance, group health, dental, retirement savings programs.
Okay.
And from there, had a couple of successful careers in other sales industries before I started consulting 20 years ago.
Oh, that's great. It's funny you say that. That's the first few guests that we've had on the podcast had some pretty interesting stories about how they got started. You're the first person to say you came and grew up in a sales household. I was on the opposite end of the spectrum. My father said to me, "Whatever you do, don't go into sales." He was My father was one of those anti-salespeople. He believed some of the stereotypes about salespeople, so it was kind of one of those things. But that's a
Isn't
great
that
story.
funny?
Similar backgrounds as well. As you know, I spent a little time in the financial services arena as well, which I think a lot of people do that explore a sales career. You know, in some capacity, they
Yeah,
touch that industry. So
absolutely.
one of the things, Colleen, that I think is just rampant in the world that we're living in today, you know, it's a much different world than what it was 20 years ago, perhaps when you started
Oh,
your
yeah.
consulting work. Just from the pace of things, the way people promote themselves, sell in general. So we talk a lot about value and impact on this podcast. Tell me your impressions or how you define both value and impact. I'd love to get your perspective on it.
Yeah, and 20 years, 30 years ago, or however long it was, I don't like to admit that I started selling. I think the one thing that has stayed the same and it leads into value is the fact that the very best salespeople know that their job is to help somebody solve an issue, uncover an issue. But
Mhm,
ultimately, our job has always been and always will be to leave the prospect in in a better state, in a better position, better off than they were before they met us, right?
mhm,
So value is critical. I think what's changed around value and impact is that our job now is to deliver what I like to call operational value. So it used to be that if I sold a widget, I would sell it based on the value that that widget could deliver to that person. But now that creates a commoditized environment. So now what I have to do is talk about the non-widget value that that
mhm,
widget brings, right? And whether it's a service or a product, you have to be able to say, how does your tool, let's say you're selling a tool, help the HR department? How does it help the sales department? How does it add value to marketing, to maintenance, to manufacturing, to shipping and receiving, and to their customers? Because then you create what I like to call operational value, right?
mhm,
My clients who are selling robotics equipment right now are doing it by selling to HR. And they're saying, this is how many less people you have to hire because we know how hard it is to hire. This is
mhm.
how many less repetitive strain injury claims you're going to have. And this is how much happier your workforce is going to be, which means they're going to be retained.
Hmm.
even 5 years ago, all they did was sell to the maintenance guys saying, or to the manufacturing, floor to say, "This is how much faster it's gonna be," right? And that just doesn't cut it anymore.
Hmm. So the
So
prospect profile has changed as well because with advances like you're mentioning
absolutely,
robotics, you bring in a whole different decision maker profile to what you're used to speaking to.
absolutely. You know,
Okay.
it's funny, you mentioned I just wrote my latest book was just released in March, Right on the Money, and I think it was 5 or 7 years ago I wrote Nonstop Sales Boom. In Nonstop Sales Boom, I have an entire chapter about honing in on your ideal prospect and really selling to this avatar of this ideal perfect person. And
Hmm.
in, 7 years later, I actually have an entire chapter on how you have to throw out the ideal prospect because everybody is your prospect. And that's kind of, along your lines of impact, right? We have to
Yeah.
be willing to dig in to find the ways our business can impact other companies that they're not even thinking about, right?
Mm.
Um, Most people are just saying, hey, I know you can impact this because you can speed up performance, but I had no idea you could impact my business in these other ways.
Oh, that's a great point. I know when I talk with people about value and impact and a lot of the work that I do, I remind people that in today's world, a lot different than what it was 20 years ago. Somebody can grab their smartphone and find 1,000 other people that may do what you do. So value
Yeah,
will only barely get you in the door. If you really want to win business and develop those strong relationships, you have to go further. You have to dig into impact and really create that for the prospects.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
if you don't, you've commoditized yourself, right? I mean, no one wants to be a commodity. I do work with a lot of companies that sell commodity products, true commodities, prices traded on the
Hmm.
stock market, commodities. And we say to them all the time, if you sell the way you sold 10 years ago and sell the way everyone else does, then you have commoditized yourself as well as your product. And that is the death
Mm.
of a salesperson these days.
There's no doubt about it. And I think, the ultimate goal hasn't changed, but the landscape has changed. Like, I know
Yeah.
and I've been in sales for 35 plus years. What I realized early on was you had to become a trusted advisor. You had to be somebody that people counted on. And when you spoke to them about things, they took your advice and you really developed that bond, that relationship, whether the relationship was 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 years, you needed to create that. And today it seems that that's still the case. It's just harder to become that. And maybe it's because consumers are
Yes.
more educated, but you can't do what you did 10 years ago and have the same level of success. You have to kind of, level up your game quite a bit.
Absolutely. And, I really believe and side with my good friend, business mentor, Alan Weiss on this, and that we've
Hmm.
really needed to elevate ourselves from even trusted advisor to becoming an object of interest. And when I think about your term impact, you have a lot of impact when you have something that's interesting to say, something that makes people kind of cock their head a little bit and go, what are you talking about? I've never heard that before.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the key for people now is just recognizing and acknowledging that it's less about us and it's all about the prospect, and you need to figure out a way of understanding the prospect's optic. Like, how are they looking at you? How
Yes,
do they perceive value? How do they envision the impact that you'll have? And then you need to kind of fill in the gap. At least that's certainly what
absolutely.
I'm seeing. So you're
Yeah.
you're working with a lot of different industries as well. You've seen quite a bit.
Mhm.
Um, we don't need to get into how long. We'll just say you started selling at a young age because you grew up in a household where you started selling. So what are the other industry things that you're recognizing? Because you're as a consultant, I'm sure you hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, and trying to help people fix sales environments. What are you seeing that's going on in the marketplace?
Well, right now, what I'm seeing is a tremendous amount of exhaustion and frustration, right? From
Mm,
both a buyer and a supplier standpoint. So, if it's not prices going up, it's supply chain not being available. If it's not supply chain being available, it's people not being available.
mm,
Um, and it seems to be one thing after another these days, right? I've got my favorite story from the last year was a client of ours who's a cardboard box manufacturer for packing supplies, and they can't
okay.
get packing tape. you know? I mean, it's like, I mean, you shake your head and all you can do is kind of laugh, but that frustration from both ends is very real. And so we have always known that empathy was a key um characteristic of top salespeople. And I think it's even more important now because everybody is stressed and frazzled and crazy busy and frustrated and exhausted for different reasons. And as salespeople, we have our own reasons for feeling that way, but we
Hmm.
really have to recognize what our customers are feeling as well and be tuned into it because they are tired and frustrated for a lot of reasons, and we have to find ways to solve for those issues, not
Hmm.
add to them.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's almost as if that trusted advisor status or person of interest status that you're really trying to aspire to has additional layers, and sometimes it's confidant, sometimes
Yeah.
it's psychologist, sometimes it's whatever it takes to get that client through what they're dealing with. That's a great point, though.
Exactly, and I think it's getting people to think long term because everyone is thinking really short term right now. So what like, when they see prices go up, and some of my clients, honestly, in the last 12 months have gone through 8 price increases. So,
Oh, wow.
they're dealing with this consistently. They've had to learn to say, yeah, maybe the price per widget or per pound or per gallon or whatever it is that they're selling has gone up, but we have to look at the overall annual program, right?
Hmm.
And so they have to get more people involved than just purchasing because purchasing might just be looking at the column, but the owners can speak to the value, or the senior leaders or the executives or the other departments can speak to the actual value.
Hmm.
So we're seeing that the best salespeople are forcing an apples to oranges comparison when it comes to price or cost, because what they want their customers to do is factor in, let's just call it the net cost of doing business with them instead of the
Hmm.
gross cost, which is, you know, what you're paying on a per dollar, gallon, acre, whatever it is, less
Hmm.
all of the savings that we're providing you. And it's
Yeah.
not an easy thing to do, but it is critical in this environment.
Yeah, no, I can certainly imagine that. I would imagine, especially when you're thinking of the different pricing considerations in all the different industries, these challenges don't necessarily have a timeline as to when they're going to go away, and it really presses the sales professional to make what might not be a
Yeah.
complex sale today a complex sale because maybe they have to involve other decision makers. They have to
Yeah.
involve different people, in that gross to net comparison, hard costs
Yeah.
versus soft costs. And
Absolutely.
it's the conversation, over my career where, I used to analyze and look at salespeople and I said, well, here's somebody who has two arrows in his quiver or three arrows in his quiver. They know how to do certain things. And I think the elite professional today needs to understand the environment and recognize how their approach has to change. And I think that's
Absolutely.
something that's different in the marketplace today than what it was certainly in recent years. Now,
Absolutely, and it really is requiring I shouldn't say it's requiring, a 180-degree different skill set, because I think that the skills are there. It's just requiring, using them in different ways and with different people. So,
mhm,
the sellers who are winning today are going very wide and deep across organizations, both from a value creation standpoint, but also just a contact standpoint.
and that's a really valid point and statement that you made. Some people don't understand, certainly in a B2B environment, how important that can be towards not only
Yeah.
solidifying the business that you have with them, but the relationship. Um, and I'm sure you've engaged in situations like this where a key decision maker with the client leaves and a sales professional doesn't have the established relationships across other people in the organization. The new person comes in and it's not their guy, their person, and all of a
Yep.
sudden they're starting all over from a relationship standpoint.
Yep.
And that's, there's challenges, but I think there's a lot of upside to that approach of going wider and deeper with a prospect.
Absolutely. I was just on a call yesterday with a client in their sales meeting, and they were walking through this scenario. And what happened is during COVID, their customer, a big construction company, actually went bankrupt and then restarted as another company. And my client, the supplier, never let them skip a beat. They never ran out of product. They never cut their credit. They just kept rolling, because of what they knew about the company. And they
Hmm.
kept the new company in business and they helped them wind down the old company and they lost some money doing it.
Mm.
Unfortunately, they only had a relationship with one procurement person who then left. Now there's a new
Mm.
procurement team and they're putting this thing out to bid because the new team has no idea what kind of work and service and value they provided to them last year. And the sales rep realizes now they're at huge risk of losing it because they don't have relationships with the owner of the construction company and the maintenance managers and the fleet owners and the project managers who can go in, who could march into that procurement department because it's a privately held company. This is not
Hmm.
a government mandated RFP and say, you can't do that. These guys saved us.
Yeah,
An
it's
extreme example, I know, but we're seeing more and more of that right now.
oh, I can certainly imagine. When you factor in the other realities going on in the world today, certainly in the marketplace, the great resignation, people leaving organizations at a record clip, it does
Oh,
create
yeah,
challenges for other people, not just people that are in HR, but the people that are working with the members that do happen to leave. And
yeah,
it really deepens the importance of a lot of other aspects of selling that sometimes people lose sight of. Like, we live in this fast-paced world where people are used to automation, they're used to um, validation happening faster, transactions happening quickly, but there's certain relationship benefits that you can't shortchange. And I want to go to an oldie but a goodie,
no,
but and I know you'll respect this a lot, is get all the decision makers around the table with you, get everybody together, even if they're on the periphery of the decision, get them engaged, because if you
yeah,
don't, you run the risk of what you're just describing from that scenario. Um, and
absolutely.
I've seen that happen as well. It's funny you said that. I've seen that happen with a client that I've done some recent work with, where a very key decision maker left for what was $1 million a year account, and it took the better part of another 6 months to re-engage with the new person and just to start the
Yeah,
relationship again. And that's a
that's
challenge.
so hard to do.
It there's no doubt about it. So,
It is a continued struggle. I see, even today with clients who know that this has been an ongoing problem for years, they still have a hard time getting their teams to expand their contact base inside the account. I mean, it takes,
yeah.
from a manager's perspective, it's a heavy lift, and it requires some very assertive and directive management techniques, such as I want to meet the customer. So set up a group meeting, so that we can
Mhm.
get more people in the room. Although interestingly, and I don't know, Joe, if your clients have seen this, a lot of my clients who are in the like really traditional industries who see their customers face to face, they
Mhm.
found that during some of the lockdowns when they had to use this kind of video technology, they met more people. It seemed to be easier or maybe less threatening for people to show up to meetings in a remote environment. And so one of my clients who sells manufacturing equipment said that they used to go on site and they'd meet like two of the engineers, and on average, in the video meetings, they were getting 6. And so
Mm.
now they're getting a much broader perspective. And it was a great lesson learned for them because they wanted to figure out how to replicate that in person so they could learn some skills there. But they also are continuing to do some of this hybrid selling because different people show up in an easier to, I guess, talk to a salesperson environment.
That's a great point, and I have seen that, and sometimes even a surprise. There's been times when senior leadership, they're looking at the calendar and they see a meeting and they're available, their schedule frees up and they click on a link, and the next thing they know, they're inside a meeting, whereas perhaps that never would have happened. They're in a remote office somewhere. It just wasn't going to happen without virtual technology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I remember, one of my young sellers, he was so enthusiastic. Week 1 of the lockdowns, he was, all sullen and this is never gonna work and this is stupid and my clients need to see to me. Week 2, he's like, "I'm meeting people I've never met before. This is great." The transformation was quite remarkable.
Yeah, whenever I hear people tell stories like that and complain, I always say, you need a little bit of windshield time to bring you back to reality. Let's get you back in the car, drive around for
Yeah,
45 minutes to an hour between the next appointment, waste all that time, and then you'll realize how special virtual technology can be and what you can do with it.
exactly.
So the world changes, things look a lot different, right? The pace of things, the complexity of things, some things are better, some things are worse. What are the things that you see in professional selling right now that, for lack of a better way of putting, excite you or energize you about the sales environments that you're encountering? What are you seeing that excites you about it?
Well, I'm seeing a few things. I'm really excited by the fact that customers are wanting to remain loyal. But what we've been talking to salespeople about, and what we've noticed is that they've shifted the way they're rewarding loyalty. So I
Mm,
said to an audience in August, it's no longer a hats and donuts environment. We've moved away from environments where we're simply rewarding loyalty based on spiffs and concerts and playoff tickets and long lunches out, and we've really moved the conversation to a sophisticated value conversation.
hmm
And I like that because I think um, it adds a level of professionalism and importance to the salesperson. We are no longer the guy or the gal who just pulls out, some hockey tickets in the back of her pocket and earns loyalty. We are the
hmm
ones who are sitting down and analyzing how our solution affects and impacts every single business unit in that company to save that company, millions of dollars or, millions of hours of time or, people, claims, lawsuits, compliance issues.
mm
So I love that level of sophistication, and watching salespeople step into that and having success is wonderful.
mm. And that's a great point, and I agree completely. I've seen that, and some of my early career opportunities were in traditional industries that a lot of the things that you're describing would occur. I was in
Yeah,
transportation for a while, and dealing with traffic managers and in individual companies. It was always about what spiffs you could provide a traffic manager to get you in the door or give you an opportunity. And I mean, think of it this way: whole industries have been built off of that. I know you're very familiar with the pharmaceutical space. Just getting in the door to talk to the doctors, lunches, donuts, all the things across the board to get in the door to create that. And, it's exciting, but it's also, you know, you have to ask what's next. We progress, and you have to think what's going to be the next
absolutely.
part of the process. And um, I always laugh in every one of these interviews that I talk with people during the podcast. There's always a few goosebump moments for me. I'm one of those strange guys that I just geek out about certain things sales wise because I spent my whole career doing it. Now, when I hear these things from other thought leaders, I'm reminded of the significant impact that they have, the people that are
Yep.
impacted, the companies, the jobs, all of these things. And for
Yeah.
all the people that you know believe that sales is a negative thing, you have to remember that it fuels so much, and you have to be reminded of that every
Yeah.
day when you're out there talking to people. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I always like to ask people, Colleen, and I know it's one of these things that everybody has funny stories about, but what's your most interesting sales story that you could share? Something that's just interesting, unique, special, bizarre, something like, I'd like to ask people what that might be.
I have so many because I sell into some very bizarre industries or interesting industries, interesting to me, anyways.
Okay, well, pick one that would be surprising.
Well, I think I have a couple of interesting ones. One is my own personal experience. So before I started consulting, I sold software, records management and compliance software. And I was working a really large deal. I think it ultimately was going to be about $13 million or something crazy like that
Mm,
over the contract to the US Air Force. And we were going around to every major command in the U.S. Air Force to get their buy-in from all I think they were all colonels at the time who were in charge of this technology piece. So I went around to all the major commands, which was as exciting as Honolulu and as kind of plain as O'Fallon, Illinois. So it's not all great locations, but
uh-huh.
got all this buy-in, built this huge business case, did a great job of building all the stakeholders, and then showed up at General Woodward's office. He was posted to the Pentagon, but the office wasn't in the Pentagon. And I remember showing up there, and I laid out my business case to him, and he sat there very quietly and very politely. And he was a really big man, and he just looked at me squarely in the face from across the table, and he said, "Well, that's great, Colleen, but the last time I checked, they all reported to me." And then just shut up. And I remember sitting there thinking, "This is an objection I have never heard before."
That is, yep. You're in a different world now. That's right.
It was pretty funny, at the time.
That's
Pretty
great.
scary at the time. It's pretty funny to think about now, but,
I'll tell you what, you
that
ever
was a
want to
good
hear some
one.
interesting stories? Get a bunch of salespeople with a lot of experience together, have them sit down in a room and just start telling interesting sales stories. My I have a lot of them as well. The thing that I always crack about is I've had many different sales opportunities, and my career started in a shaky way. My very first formal sales job I went to training for, and my parents gifted me a brand new briefcase so I could keep everything organized, which was great. You know, the leather bound briefcase with the little metal clips on the end so you could stand it up, and it was
Oh,
great.
yeah.
And at the end of the week long training class, I set the briefcase on the table, and when I went to pick it up, I didn't pick it up off the table. I unintentionally slid it. So I started off my sales career digging a 6-inch carved out slash in a beautiful mahogany conference room table, and I figured I nowhere to go but up. I was devastated at that.
Exactly.
Has anybody ever gotten fired in training because I thought that was going to happen to me? Um, there's
Oh, man.
always stories. Now, I
Oh,
always
yeah.
like to ask people, Colleen, because yeah, I know our listeners and the people that I talk to, they like to get bulleted ways to impact their success. If you were to narrow down two very specific things that any sales professional should be doing, what would you call your top two things?
So, number one, pay really close attention to your sales velocity data. It's something we wrote about I've written about in all my books because I think the data is so critical.
Hmm.
So, four key metrics: the number of deals in your pipeline, the average value of those deals, your closing ratio as a percentage, and the number of days in those stage.
Mm.
And those are the most important metrics. You should be looking at them every day, and you should be doing the velocity calculation to see whether you're actually heading towards your target or not, so you
Hmm.
can figure out what to do, right? I think as much as we talk about the art in sales and relationships and helping people and the right questions to ask, if you're not paying attention to the science, you will never be successful on purpose. You might
Mm.
have some flukes and some accidents, but you'll have no idea why you were successful. And I tell people all the time, I don't care that you know that you're good. I care that you know why you're good. And the
Yeah.
numbers will tell you that. So that's number
Excellent.
one.
Okay.
And number two, when all else fails, put a lot of high quality leads in the top end of the pipeline because all good selling starts with prospecting. So no
Hmm.
matter whether you are a 20 or a 30-year vet on this call or brand new in sales, the most important things you could be doing every single day is prospecting for either net new business or new opportunities inside your existing account. But you could be the best closer in the world.
Hmm.
If you don't have enough in your pipeline, you still won't hit your target, right?
Hmm. Absolutely. That's that is dead on. And that's almost exactly how I describe it to people. Many times I've said to people, you can't sell your way past a bad pipeline. If your pipeline is weak,
No, you
if you
can't.
have horrible prospects in there, not enough of them, and the ones you do have aren't going to get you there anyway, there's no amount of sales skills that overcomes that. And it's funny you mentioned
Absolutely.
that because it's so true. Maybe it's just me, but I've recognized a trend where your really elite prospectors, the really elite people that know how to generate prospects and build the pipeline, many times outperform people that have much better sales skills but are weak at
Oh, yeah.
prospecting. And I know
Absolutely,
for
they
you
do.
as well, like I would always look for that person that I just knew could prospect and build the pipeline
Yeah.
because I knew I could develop the art side of it. I knew I could work with them. You know, it's
Yeah.
kind of like skill and will. Like if you can have all the
Absolutely.
skill in the world, if you don't have the will, you're not really going anywhere. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's a much harder skill as well on that prospecting. And so you're absolutely right. A full pipeline will solve a lot of sales problems.
there's no doubt about it. So, Colleen, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience about you, where they could follow you? What else could you tell us about Colleen Francis that everybody needs to know?
Sure. I mean, you are all welcome to join me on LinkedIn, which is where we do the majority of our publishing of high content sales tips and strategies. And of course, on my website at Engage Selling. I am a huge believer of providing you many, many resources, whether it be in audio, video, written books, so that you can learn and be better at your craft. Because I truly believe that the best salespeople are those who are constantly learning and evolving. So I invite people to join me either at engageselling.com or on LinkedIn.
Well, that's great. Colleen, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you with us today. I still got a couple of goosebumps going on the left side of my body here. The sales geek in me is still listening to these things. I love these conversations. I know the impact that it's having on the people that are listening and actually taking this information. And please, you're getting these just gold tips from people on the podcast. Use them, get out there, do something with it. Make sure you turn it into something that's going to benefit you. So, Colleen, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure to have you. Um, like we say on the Impact Sales Podcast, sell better and impact the world. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Are you an entrepreneur or a sales professional who's struggling to meet and exceed the sales objectives that you have for yourself? Are you getting nothing but pushback from your prospects and objections like it costs too much, or I have to wait, or I can't do this until the fall or the spring, or never, right? If you're hearing any of those types of things, I'd like to help. For well over 30 years, and after tens of thousands of live sales interactions and hundreds of millions of dollars of closed transactions, I've developed a proprietary system for impact selling. It'll help you overcome objections, move business forward much more quickly, and most importantly, help get business across the finish line. You can learn more about my system as well as how I can personally help you increase sales in your business by attending a personalized custom impact sales strategy session. This session is your opportunity to talk about what's going on with sales in your business and, more importantly, how you might be able to make some adjustments to take sales to the next level. You can schedule your impact sales strategy session by texting the word sales to the number 321 421 5213. That's sales to 321 421 5213. You don't have to settle for average sales results when you can truly make an impact. This is Joe Beck, and I look forward to speaking with you. Hi, we're back with the Impact Sales Podcast. Wow, what a great main segment with Colleen Francis. Colleen just really hit on a couple of critical points that I think everybody needs to think about. You know, the world around us has changed. The selling environments have changed. The decision makers have changed. And we need to take a closer look at reevaluating who we are selling to, especially in certain industries that have a lot of turnover, things changing constantly. Certain things, though, haven't gone out of style, creating and delivering significant value. And most importantly, highlighting and developing significant impact for your prospects and clients, the type of things that help you stand out as a sales professional. And what does that mean? That means asking deeper, meaningful questions, developing relationships at a whole new level than what you're used to doing. And most importantly, positioning yourself as that go-to resource or advisor that they need to rely on to get the answers that they need. And Colleen was talking about how important it is to not only just be that significant trusted advisor, but also that person of interest, somebody that's appealing and attractive to them, somebody that they just know they're going to have a lot of value from and receive significant impact. So I'm so appreciative of Colleen taking the time to join us on the podcast. And I just want to remind everybody that if you're out there selling and you're struggling and you're facing different challenges with what you're trying to do, you're not alone. There's plenty of resources out there to get the help that you need, content, support structures, people that can help you. Don't miss opportunities to get better at your craft and improve what you're doing. You can absolutely have a much bigger impact in the world by improving your sales skills. So make the most of that. If we can help you here at the Impact Sales Podcast and the Sales Activist, just reach out to us. You can text the word sales to the number 321-421-5213 for a lot of great content, or to connect with us to get the help that you need with sales in your business. I'm Joe Beck with the Impact Sales Podcast, and we'll talk to you soon.